He carried the Apache woman for 10 hours, but the chief revealed a secret no one expected. A lone traveler rode slowly along the narrow trail, his horse steady but tired. The man was strong, with a rugged face sunburned from many days under the open sky. He carried little more than a worn backpack, a canteen of water, and a sturdy knife strapped to his belt. His name was not important to the people he might meet, for he had wandered far from towns and cities, drawn by the call of the wild land. The journey had been long, and the traveler had faced many challenges along the way. Streams too wide to jump, rocky paths that cut the hooves of his horse, and sudden gusts of wind that made him lean heavily on the saddle. Yet, he did not complain. There was a calm determination in his eyes, a quiet understanding that the land demanded respect and patience. Every step he took was measured, every glance toward the horizon cautious, for he knew this part of the land belonged to the Apache. As he crested a small rise, he noticed something unusual far ahead. A figure was lying near a cluster of rocks, partially hidden by dry shrubs. At first he thought it might be an animal, perhaps injured or resting. But as he got closer, the shape became clear. A person, a young woman dressed in the clothing of the Apache, struggling to move. Her breathing was shallow, and she tried to sit up but winced, clutching her side. She had dark hair, tangled and dusty, and her face was pale, marked with small scratches and dirt from the harsh landscape. The traveler slowed his horse and dismounted carefully, keeping a safe distance. He could see the fear in her eyes as she looked at him, and he raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. She flinched at first but did not run. She seemed too weak to run. He could feel the tension in the air, the quiet fear of an encounter between strangers in the open wilderness. "Hey," he said gently, his voice calm and steady. "I won't hurt you. Can you stand?" The woman shook her head, wincing as she tried to shift her weight. Pain was clear in every movement. The traveler quickly assessed her injuries. Her ankle seemed twisted, and there were bruises along her arms and legs. She had probably fallen or been in a fight. He knew the land was unforgiving, and without help, she could not survive long in the harsh sun and rough terrain. Without hesitation, he approached slowly, speaking softly to reassure her. "I'm going to help you. Can you trust me?" Her eyes searched his face, uncertain but desperate. She nodded slightly. That was all the answer he needed. He crouched beside her, examining her injuries carefully. He gently lifted her to see how much weight she could bear. She groaned softly, but the pain was obvious. He realized quickly that walking with her was impossible. She needed to be carried. He lifted her carefully, placing her across his shoulders in a way that would distribute her weight evenly. She was surprisingly light, but not so light that the journey would be easy. Every step would require strength and focus. He took a deep breath, adjusted his grip, and began walking toward the nearest safe place he could find, hoping to reach the edge of the Apache land where she might be able to receive help. The sun was harsh, and the wind carried dust and dry leaves that stung their faces. The traveler moved steadily, aware that he could not rush, or they both might suffer. His muscles ached as he walked, but he did not complain. Every time she shifted slightly, wincing, he adjusted his hold, offering a small word of comfort. "Almost there. Just keep still." As they moved, he noticed the signs of the land, tracks of deer, the occasional bird circling above, and the sound of a distant stream. The wilderness was alive around them, indifferent to human struggle. He kept going, determined to carry her as far as he could. Every hour that passed added to the burden, yet he remained focused. He could not imagine leaving her alone in the wilderness. During a brief rest, he set her down gently under the shade of a small rock overhang. She tried to sit up, but her face twisted with pain. He handed her some water from his canteen, and she drank slowly, her hands trembling. He watched her closely, noticing how exhausted she was. The thought of continuing the journey weighed heavily on him, but he knew there was no other choice. She could not survive here alone. As they rested, the woman finally spoke, her voice soft and cautious. "Thank you," she whispered in broken English, the accent thick and unfamiliar. The traveler smiled, encouraging her to rest more before continuing. He had little idea what language she spoke fully, but gestures and simple words would have to be enough for now. The land around them was beautiful but unforgiving. Dry hills rolled into the distance, punctuated by scattered trees and jagged rocks. The sky was a clear blue, but the sun beat down relentlessly. The traveler knew the journey ahead would test both his endurance and his will. He could see the path stretching before them, narrow and winding, with no shelter in sight. But he did not hesitate. He lifted her again, feeling the strain in his shoulders and back. Sweat ran down his face and his muscles burned, but he pressed on. Every step was careful. He could not afford to stumble. The woman clung lightly to him, her trust growing slowly. She whispered short words in her language, and he nodded, not understanding fully but sensing her gratitude. Hours passed, and the traveler continued steadily, stopping only when he needed to rest briefly. He found small patches of shade where they could pause for a moment, and he offered water each time. The sun began its slow descent, turning the landscape golden, and shadows lengthened across the hills. Despite his fatigue, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He was doing what he knew was right. Along the way, he thought about the woman's story, piecing together clues from her words and actions. She had likely been caught in some trouble, perhaps fleeing from danger or attacked while traveling. The details were unclear, but the urgency of her situation was undeniable. He could not imagine leaving her behind. As evening approached, the air cooled slightly, and the colors of the land became softer. The traveler scanned the horizon for any signs of the Apache camp or other people who could help. The woman stirred slightly, leaning on him, her trust now apparent in her relaxed posture. He felt a sense of responsibility heavier than the physical weight of carrying her. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only a part of the day, he reached a small clearing with signs of water nearby. A stream trickled quietly, and he lowered the woman gently to the ground. She looked at him, eyes wide with relief, and whispered her thanks again. He offered her a small piece of dried bread from his pack, and she ate slowly, regaining some strength. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with orange and pink, the traveler knew this was only the beginning. The journey was far from over and the challenges ahead were unknown, but he felt a quiet resolve, a determination that nothing would stop him from ensuring her safety. He would carry her through the night if needed, over rocks, through streams and across the hills. Night began to settle and the first stars appeared in the sky. The traveler stood, brushing the dust from his clothes, and prepared to continue. The woman leaned on him, trusting him completely now. He felt a deep sense of purpose, understanding that this moment, this decision to help her, was more important than any danger or hardship he might face. In the quiet of the wilderness, with only the sounds of night birds and the rustle of the wind, the traveler lifted her again and continued along the trail. Every step was a testament to human compassion, endurance, and courage. The journey was far from over, but he knew he was not alone. Together, they would face the unknown, bound by trust, hope, and the unspoken promise of survival. And so, with the stars beginning to shine above, he carried the Apache woman through the fading light, unaware of the secrets and surprises that awaited them at the end of the long, difficult journey. The land was harsh, the night cold, but their story had begun. A story of courage, resilience, and the extraordinary strength of the human heart. The first stars of night twinkled above the rugged hills, casting faint light over the narrow trail the traveler followed. He adjusted his grip on the Apache woman, her small weight resting heavily yet securely on his shoulders. The night air was cooler, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant pine trees. Every sound was sharp and vivid, the rustling of leaves, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft trickle of a hidden stream. In the stillness, he felt the vastness of the land pressing around him, a reminder of how small and fragile humans were against the wilderness. Each step was difficult. Rocks shifted under his boots, and the uneven ground threatened to throw off his balance. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady, her head leaning lightly against his shoulder. He could feel every movement she made and adjusted carefully, mindful of her injuries. Her ankle had swollen further during the short rest, and bruises along her arms had darkened. Yet despite the pain, she whispered words of encouragement in her soft, unfamiliar language, a quiet reminder of the trust growing between them. The traveler's own body protested. His shoulders burned with strain, his legs ached from the continuous march, and his arms felt as if they might collapse under the constant weight. Sweat soaked his shirt, clinging to his skin as the night air chilled him in waves. Yet with every labored step, he reminded himself why he continued. Leaving her in the wilderness was unthinkable. He had seen enough hardship in his life to know that survival depended on courage, endurance, and compassion. As they climbed a small ridge, the traveler paused for a moment, looking back at the dark expanse they had crossed. The hills rolled endlessly into the distance, dotted with trees and jagged rocks, illuminated faintly by the moonlight. He spotted no signs of immediate danger, yet he knew the wilderness held threats unseen: snakes, wild animals, or even hostile humans. The woman shifted slightly on his shoulders, a soft groan escaping her lips. He whispered words of reassurance, though she likely understood little of what he said. It was more important that she felt safety than comprehended language. After a brief pause, they continued. The trail became steeper, forcing him to slow his pace. His boots slipped on loose gravel, and he gritted his teeth against the effort. The woman's grip on him tightened, almost instinctively, as if she sensed his exhaustion and wanted to give him strength in return. Their silent bond deepened with each step, an unspoken understanding that they were relying on each other, connected by the simple human desire to survive. Hours passed. The traveler kept moving, stopping only occasionally to offer water or adjust her position. The woman drank slowly, the faint glow of the moon illuminating her weary face. Her dark hair fell in loose strands around her shoulders, catching the pale light. Despite the injuries, there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a determination that inspired him to push further. He knew she was more than just a fragile figure needing help. She was a person with courage, resourcefulness, and a will to live. As they navigated a narrow path between two rocky outcrops, the traveler noticed movement in the shadows. His hand instinctively went to the knife at his belt. The night was alive with possibilities, some dangerous, some harmless. A small fox darted across the trail, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The traveler exhaled slowly, realizing that even in the darkness, the wilderness tested his alertness and patience. Each step forward was not only a physical challenge but a mental one, requiring constant focus and care. The woman spoke softly in her language, her voice barely above a whisper. He did not understand the words, but the tone was gentle, almost musical. He nodded and replied with his own simple words, offering comfort. The language barrier mattered little. Their shared struggle created its own communication. Every glance, every small movement conveyed meaning: fear, relief, trust, and determination. At one point, the trail became steep and rocky, forcing the traveler to use both hands to stabilize himself. He lowered the woman slightly to reduce the strain but could not rest for long. The terrain was too dangerous to linger. With careful movements, he climbed each step, careful not to slip, careful not to let her fall. The moonlight guided them, but shadows played tricks on the eyes, hiding pitfalls and obstacles. Each successful step felt like a small victory in the long, grueling journey. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. He did not know how many hours had passed. He had lost all sense of time. The only measure was the woman's strength, which ebbed and flowed, and his own aching body, which he refused to let slow him down. He thought of the sun rising again, of the possibility of reaching safety before the full light of day. That thought alone drove him forward. Around the fourth hour, fatigue began to gnaw more deeply. His muscles trembled, and every step required immense concentration. The woman stirred slightly, whispering a question he could not understand. He smiled faintly and replied, "Almost there. Keep quiet. We're almost there." It was both encouragement and a reassurance that he too needed. Their eyes met briefly, and she nodded slightly, her trust unwavering despite the pain and fear that must have gripped her heart. The traveler thought of the dangers they had avoided so far, the loose rocks, sudden drops, and hidden holes. He remembered stories he had heard about travelers in these lands, many of whom had not survived the night. He was determined not to become another cautionary tale. The woman's life depended on him, and he accepted the weight of that responsibility fully. By the sixth hour, exhaustion was beginning to blur his vision. His back ached from the constant weight, his arms trembled from supporting her, and his legs felt as though they might give way at any moment. Yet, every time he looked at her, he found renewed strength. She was silent mostly now, eyes closed in a mix of pain and trust. He could feel the rise and fall of her chest, steady but slow. Each breath reminded him of the urgency, and he pushed onward. They crossed a small stream, icy water splashing over their boots. He kept her body elevated above the current, careful not to slip on the wet stones. Her hair brushed against his face as she shifted slightly, trying to keep balance. A small smile passed across her lips, and he smiled faintly back, acknowledging the shared challenge. The wilderness was relentless, but it also offered moments of beauty and connection, however brief. As night deepened, the temperature dropped. The traveler adjusted his own clothing, covering the woman with a small blanket from his pack. He could see her shivering slightly, and he tightened his hold, offering warmth and comfort. The stars were now bright above, scattered like diamonds across a deep black sky. Despite the cold and fatigue, the beauty of the night offered a strange comfort, a reminder that life continued beyond the immediate struggle. The journey stretched on, hour after hour, each step an echo of determination and endurance. He felt his body reaching the limits of strength, but he refused to give in. The woman's trust was a weight heavier than her body, binding him to a responsibility he could not abandon. He imagined the moment they would reach safety, when she could finally rest without fear, and that image drove him onward like a beacon. Around the eighth hour, the traveler's pace slowed significantly. Every step was painstaking, each movement calculated to prevent injury. His arms ached from holding her, and his back burned from the strain. Yet, through the pain, he continued, never once letting his mind consider stopping. The woman shifted slightly, and he whispered words of encouragement. She opened her eyes briefly, giving him a small nod of gratitude and trust. It was enough to keep him moving. The terrain grew more difficult as they neared the higher hills. Loose stones threatened to topple him, and sudden drops demanded constant attention. The traveler's senses were heightened to their fullest, every sound and shadow noted. The woman, though silent, seemed to understand his caution, holding herself still and trusting entirely in his guidance. Their bond had grown stronger through the shared struggle, a connection beyond words or language. As the ninth hour approached, the traveler began to see the faint glow of light in the distance, a sign of life, perhaps a camp or settlement. His spirits lifted slightly, and he urged himself forward. The woman shifted, leaning against him more fully, as if sensing the nearness of safety. Her trust had grown absolute, and in that trust he found the final reserves of strength needed to continue. Finally, after 10 long, grueling hours, they reached the edge of a small clearing. The traveler lowered the woman carefully to the ground, both of them exhausted but alive. The moonlight illuminated her face, pale but safe, and her eyes met his with a look of profound gratitude. He offered her water and a small piece of bread, and she ate slowly, savoring the relief of finally resting. The traveler sat back on his heels, his own body trembling from exhaustion. Every muscle ached, and yet he felt a quiet satisfaction. They had survived the night, the harsh wilderness, and the countless dangers along the way. More importantly, he had kept her safe. Though the journey was far from over, this first leg had forged a bond of trust and endurance that neither would forget. As dawn approached, painting the sky with soft colors, the traveler knew the next challenges awaited, approaching the Apache camp, facing the unknown reactions of the tribe, and ensuring the woman's safety within their lands. Yet, for now, they rested. The first part of their journey had been completed, a testament to courage, trust, and the strength of the human heart. And so, under the quiet stars fading into morning light, the traveler and the Apache woman shared a brief, silent moment of triumph. The grueling 10 hours had tested them both in ways unimaginable, but it had also created a bond that would guide them through the trials yet to come. The first light of dawn spread across the horizon, turning the rugged hills into soft shades of pink and gold. The traveler stood in the small clearing, his shoulders aching, his legs stiff from the long, grueling night. The Apache woman sat on the ground nearby, her body resting but still fragile. The cool morning air carried the scent of the earth, dry grass, and distant pine trees. Birds began to stir, their songs filling the quiet wilderness, yet a tension lingered in the traveler's chest. Ahead lay the Apache camp, hidden partially by trees and low hills. He could see smoke rising in thin ribbons from small fires, a sign of life and activity. His heart quickened. After hours of carrying her through the wilderness, the most uncertain moment had arrived, entering the land of her people. He had done everything he could to bring her to safety, but he did not know how the tribe would react to an outsider walking into their territory. Would they see him as a friend, a threat, or an intruder? The woman shifted slightly as he helped her to her feet. She leaned on him, unsteady but grateful. Her dark eyes scanned the camp, cautious yet hopeful. Though the traveler did not understand all her words, her body language conveyed a mixture of relief and fear. He nodded to her gently, whispering, "We're close. Stay calm." She nodded in return, gripping his arm lightly, trusting him completely. As they approached, the sounds of the camp grew clearer, voices speaking in the Apache language, the clatter of tools, the crackling of firewood. Children's laughter floated faintly through the morning air. Despite the beauty of these sounds, tension tightened in the traveler's chest. He had grown strong and cautious in the wilderness, but now he faced an entirely different kind of challenge: human judgment. The first people they encountered were hunters returning from the forest. Their eyes widened at the sight of the traveler carrying the injured woman. They stopped abruptly, whispering to one another. The traveler raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said gently, his voice calm and measured. The woman spoke quickly in her language, explaining something he could not understand. The travelers in the camp listened closely, their expressions changing from fear to curiosity. Slowly, a small group of adults approached, led by a man whose presence was commanding. He moved with grace and authority, eyes sharp and assessing every detail. This was clearly someone important, someone whose judgment mattered. The traveler lowered the woman to the ground carefully, stepping back to show respect. He waited, silent, every muscle tense with anticipation. The man spoke softly, though the words were unfamiliar. The woman answered quickly, her voice carrying urgency and emotion. Though he could not understand them, the traveler sensed that she was explaining the journey, her injuries, and perhaps the courage it had taken for him to bring her safely. He waited patiently, knowing that his actions had already told a story. Words were secondary to deeds in moments like this. Finally, the man turned to the others in the group, gesturing with hands and nods. More people began to gather, circling them cautiously. The traveler noticed their eyes, a mix of suspicion and curiosity, assessing him, searching for signs of danger or dishonesty. The woman remained calm beside him, though she still leaned on him for support. Her trust in him was evident, and that trust was a silent appeal to the tribe. This man had saved her life. A moment later, the sound of footsteps and the rustle of clothing announced the arrival of a figure taller and older than the rest. His posture was straight, his face lined with wisdom and authority. The traveler knew instinctively that this was the Apache chief. The woman's body straightened and she spoke rapidly, pointing toward him and then to the traveler. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly, and he moved closer, observing both the man and the woman carefully. The traveler stood tall, though his body ached from the long night and grueling hours of travel. He did not speak unless spoken to, showing respect through silence and calm presence. Every movement was deliberate, careful not to offend. He could feel the chief's gaze, assessing, weighing, and judging. He had carried the woman through the wilderness, but this final test, the judgment of her people, was now upon him. The chief circled slowly, observing the traveler from head to toe. He looked at the woman, noting her injuries and the state of exhaustion. He studied the marks on her arms, the bruises on her legs, and the small scratches along her face. Then he looked back at the traveler, noting his own fatigue, the sweat on his face, and the strain in his posture. In this silence, the chief communicated more than words could. He was weighing courage, honesty, and intent. The traveler's heart pounded, but he remained calm. He knew that fear or haste could ruin the delicate balance of trust he had worked so hard to build. He lowered his eyes slightly, a gesture of respect, and waited for the chief to speak. The woman, sensing his need for calm, stayed silent, her trust unwavering. She had seen his strength and courage, and now the tribe would see it too. Finally, the chief spoke. His voice was deep and commanding, carrying the weight of authority and experience. He asked questions in the Apache language, and the woman answered swiftly, explaining the journey, the danger, and the traveler's determination. Though he could not understand the words, the traveler sensed the tone, a story of survival, trust, and courage. The chief's expression shifted slightly, from stern observation to thoughtful consideration. Other members of the tribe began to relax, seeing that the traveler posed no immediate threat. Children peeked from behind their parents, curious about the stranger who had carried the woman for so long. Some nodded subtly, while others whispered among themselves. The camp was alive with cautious energy, everyone aware of the unusual situation unfolding before them. The traveler took a small step forward, bowing his head slightly. Though he did not speak the language, his actions conveyed respect. He gestured toward the woman, then toward himself, indicating that he had only sought to help, not to harm. The chief paused, considering, then asked another question, slower this time, perhaps to gauge honesty. The woman responded carefully, choosing words that reflected the traveler's deeds and intentions. Time seemed to stretch. The traveler could feel the scrutiny of every eye in the camp. His body was exhausted, his muscles trembling, but he stood firm, knowing that patience was part of courage. The chief studied him silently for several long moments, then gestured for him to remain where he was. The woman sank gently to the ground, resting against a nearby tree. Her eyes never left the travelers, a silent promise that trust still held strong. The chief spoke again, this time directing his words to the woman. She answered with quiet confidence, explaining more details of the night's journey and the traveler's unwavering determination. Each word, each gesture, painted a picture of endurance, compassion, and bravery. The traveler listened, humbled by the woman's loyalty and by the chief's careful judgment. He knew that the final decision rested in the hands of this wise leader. Slowly, the chief walked around the traveler once more, his steps deliberate, each movement measured. He examined the ground they had walked, noting footprints and signs of struggle. He looked at the traveler's hands and arms, the sweat and strain etched into every line of his body. Then he looked at the woman again, seeing her relief, her trust, and her courage. In this moment, the traveler understood that judgment was not only about actions, but about intention and character. The camp grew quiet as everyone waited for the chief's words. Even the wind seemed to still, as if the wilderness itself paused to witness the unfolding moment. The traveler's heart raced, though he remained outwardly calm. He had carried the woman through darkness, danger, and exhaustion, but now the test of courage was not in physical strength. It was in the judgment of the tribe he had entered. Finally, the chief stopped in front of the traveler. He studied him closely, eyes searching for signs of deceit or malice. The traveler met his gaze steadily, showing honesty, respect, and humility. The chief's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. He asked one final question, slow and deliberate, that seemed to measure not only words but the very character of the traveler. The woman answered immediately, her voice calm and clear. She spoke of the traveler's selflessness, his courage, and the danger he had faced without hesitation. She emphasized that he had carried her through the wilderness without expecting anything in return. Her words, though in her own language, conveyed sincerity, trust, and deep respect. The traveler felt a sense of relief, knowing that she spoke the truth of his actions. The chief nodded slowly, absorbing the story. He looked at the traveler one last time, his gaze steady, measuring the strength of his heart, his intentions, and his honor. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with anticipation. Everyone in the camp waited, knowing that the chief's judgment would determine the traveler's fate in this unfamiliar land. Finally, the chief raised his hand, signaling that he had reached a decision. A wave of relief passed through the traveler, though he remained cautious, aware that the moment of judgment was still profound. The woman smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and gratitude, knowing that the man who had saved her was about to be accepted, at least partially, into the circle of trust of her people. The first step toward acceptance had been taken. The traveler had survived the wilderness, carried the woman through 10 hours of grueling terrain, and now faced the ultimate test. The judgment of a tribe that had watched him with caution, curiosity, and scrutiny. The moment of truth was near, and the air was thick with anticipation, as the story of courage, trust, and compassion prepared to unfold further under the watchful eyes of the Apache chief. The camp was quiet now, the morning sun casting long shadows across the ground. Smoke from small fires rose into the clear sky, carrying the earthy scent of wood and grass. The traveler stood just beyond the circle of tents and huts, his muscles still aching from the long night and the grueling journey. The Apache woman rested nearby, supported by a low log, her breathing slower and more even now. She had regained a little strength, but the struggle had left her drained. The chief stepped closer, his presence commanding attention. Every person in the camp watched silently, sensing the importance of the moment. The traveler met the chief's gaze steadily, showing respect without fear. He knew this was not the time for pride or bravado. The chief's eyes were sharp, filled with wisdom, and they seemed to look through him, assessing the very essence of his character. "Why did you risk your life for her?" the chief asked, his voice deep and calm, carrying the weight of authority. His words were deliberate, measured, and he watched the traveler closely for any sign of deceit. The traveler took a steady breath. He could not speak the Apache language fluently, but he spoke clearly in English, using simple words and gestures to convey meaning. "I could not leave her alone," he said. "She was hurt and she needed help. That is all." The chief nodded slightly, but his eyes did not soften. "There are many dangers," he said, his words translated by the woman in careful, precise language. "Travelers come and go, and not all bring honor. Why should we trust you?" The traveler bowed his head respectfully. "I have no claim here. I did not come for reward. I only wanted to help. My actions show my heart, not my words." A few members of the tribe exchanged quiet glances, their expressions curious, wary, yet impressed. The woman spoke again, translating as best she could, telling the tribe about the night's journey, the darkness, the rocks, the cold, the water, and the traveler's unwavering determination to carry her safely. She emphasized that he had not complained, had not sought anything in return, and had only focused on her survival. The chief remained silent for a long moment. His eyes swept across the traveler, then the woman, then the surrounding camp. It was clear he was considering not only the journey itself, but also the intent behind it. Actions mattered more than words in this culture, and every step of the traveler had demonstrated courage, endurance, and compassion. Yet the chief's wisdom demanded proof beyond appearances. He asked another question, slower this time, watching the traveler's response. "Would you have risked your life if no one was watching, if your deeds were unseen?" The traveler's gaze met the chief's without hesitation. "Yes," he said simply, "I would have done the same. I do not need recognition. I only needed to help her survive." The chief studied him silently, and the tension in the camp seemed to grow heavier. Every person watched, understanding that the answer to this question could determine the traveler's fate. The woman leaned slightly toward him, a silent gesture of support and trust. She knew the truth of his words, and her presence was a quiet affirmation of his honor. The chief motioned for the traveler to step forward. Carefully, the man obeyed, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow and deliberate. The chief walked around him, observing his posture, his eyes, and even the small details, the dirt on his boots, the wear of his clothing, the calluses on his hands. Every mark told a story of struggle, of hardship, and of endurance. "You carry weight not only in your arms but in your heart," the chief said finally, his voice calm but commanding. "Do you understand the meaning of respect, of trust, and of honor?" The traveler nodded. "I understand," he said. "I believe honor comes from protecting life, even when it is difficult. Trust is earned through action, not words." The chief stopped, close enough that the traveler could feel the presence of his authority. He looked at the woman, who met his gaze with a calm but intense look. Then he returned his eyes to the traveler. "Your actions are clear," he said slowly, "but the world is dangerous. Why risk yourself for someone who is not your own?" The traveler took a deep breath, his voice steady despite fatigue. "Because she is a person, because life matters. Because courage is not measured by who you are, but by what you do when someone needs help. I could not ignore her suffering." A murmur ran through the camp. Some nodded in quiet approval, others whispered among themselves. The chief's eyes softened slightly, though he did not yet speak words of judgment. He wanted to see if the traveler's courage was rooted in honesty, in moral strength rather than desperation or desire for recognition. "Your journey was long," the chief said. 10 hours through dangerous land. You faced cold, exhaustion, and threat, yet you continued. What gave you strength? The traveler looked toward the horizon, recalling the long night, the pain in his arms and back, the woman's trust weighing heavily yet inspiringly on his shoulders. "Her trust," he said simply. "Knowing she relied on me gave me strength. Every step I took was for her, not for me." The chief remained silent, but his expression softened. He was clearly impressed, though still cautious. He motioned for the woman to speak again. She stood, her small figure strong despite the exhaustion, and told the story of every obstacle they had faced together. The slippery stones, the stream, the rocky paths, the cold wind. She emphasized the traveler's unwavering determination and care. Her words carried the truth of the journey, and the sincerity of her voice resonated with everyone present. The chief listened carefully, nodding at points, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he turned fully to the traveler. "You have proven your courage and honesty through your actions," he said. "Yet your intentions must remain clear. You came here not for gain, not for glory, but to protect life. You have earned respect through your deeds. Do you accept responsibility for the trust that has been given to you? The traveler bowed slightly, humbled by the chief's words. I accept, he said. I understand that trust is not given lightly, and I will honor it as long as I live. The chief looked at the woman one final time, then back at the traveler. He gestured toward the center of the camp, inviting the traveler to follow. You will be watched, guided, and respected, he said. Your actions have earned you this, but the path ahead still requires honor and care. The land is ours, and life must be protected. The traveler nodded, understanding the gravity of the chief's words. This was not only a moment of acceptance, but a test of character that would continue. He would need to honor the trust placed in him, not only by the woman he had saved, but by the tribe who now watched him with cautious respect. The woman moved closer, resting her hand briefly on his arm as a quiet gesture of thanks and reassurance. The traveler smiled faintly, feeling a deep sense of relief and connection. Together, they had survived the wilderness, and now they faced a new challenge, integrating into the world of her people with honesty, respect, and courage. The chief turned, signaling to the tribe that the moment of judgment was complete. People began to move about the camp again, resuming daily tasks while still keeping a respectful distance. The traveler followed cautiously, aware that every step mattered, and that the eyes of the tribe would continue to watch him closely. The woman spoke softly beside him, translating the chief's instructions. He would need to rest, regain strength, and prepare for the journey ahead, guided by the wisdom of the tribe. It was clear that their acceptance was conditional, not given lightly, but earned through courage, honesty, and endurance. The traveler took a deep breath, looking around at the bustling camp. He had faced danger in the wilderness, carried the woman through 10 hours of grueling terrain, and now stood in the heart of her people's land, judged and accepted by the chief. A mixture of relief, exhaustion, and quiet pride filled him. He had survived, but more importantly, he had acted with honor, proving the truth of his heart through deeds rather than words. As he prepared to follow the woman and the chief through the camp, he realized that this was only the beginning. Trust had been earned, but respect had to be maintained. The journey ahead would not only test his physical strength, but also his ability to live with integrity, humility, and courage in a world that was unfamiliar yet profoundly alive. The morning sun rose higher, casting warm light across the camp. The traveler felt the ache of his muscles, the weight of fatigue, and the relief of survival. The woman, now stronger, walked beside him with careful steps, her trust unwavering. Together they moved forward, guided by the chief, through the camp that had once been a place of uncertainty and now held the promise of understanding, acceptance, and new beginnings. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light across the Apache camp. Smoke from morning fires mingled with the fresh scent of pine and grass, filling the air with a warm, earthy fragrance. The traveler followed the woman carefully through the camp, each step slow and deliberate. Though his body ached from the long journey and the grueling night, he felt a new strength rising from the quiet acceptance of the tribe. The chief walked ahead, silent but observant, guiding them toward the center of the camp where the tribe gathered for morning routines. The traveler noticed children playing nearby, their laughter bright and unguarded. It was a stark contrast to the tension of the night before, when danger had lurked in every shadow. Now, the camp seemed alive with life, rhythm, and community. Men and women moved with purpose, tending to daily chores, but their eyes occasionally flicked toward the traveler, curious and watchful. He sensed their cautious respect, earned through his actions and the woman's steadfast advocacy. Finally, they reached a small clearing surrounded by tents and low huts. The chief stopped, turning to face the traveler. His expression was calm but serious, the lines of his face deepened by wisdom and years of responsibility. The woman stood quietly beside the traveler, her hand lightly brushing his arm, a gesture of trust and gratitude. The chief motioned for them to sit on a low log in the center of the clearing. The camp grew silent, every eye on the scene. The chief's presence commanded attention without words, a symbol of authority and experience. The traveler sat carefully, mindful of his posture, showing respect through every movement. The woman sat beside him, leaning slightly but steady. The air was filled with anticipation. Everyone sensed that something important was about to be revealed. The chief spoke slowly, deliberately, each word carrying weight. "You have risked yourself to save life. You have shown courage, honesty, and endurance. Your deeds speak louder than words." His voice resonated across the clearing, and even those who did not understand every word sensed the gravity. "Yet there is more to this story," he continued, pausing to allow the silence to settle. "There is a secret that must be known before trust is complete." The traveler straightened, curious but cautious. He had survived the wilderness and earned the respect of the tribe, but the mention of a secret stirred a new tension. He looked at the woman, whose eyes were wide with anticipation. She, too, seemed eager to hear what the chief would reveal. The chief turned to her first. "You are brave, and your trust in this man is clear. But you carry something hidden, something even you may not fully understand." The woman's brow furrowed slightly. She looked at the traveler as if seeking reassurance, but he only gave a small nod, encouraging her to listen. The chief's gaze returned to the traveler. "You carried her for 10 hours through danger, darkness, and exhaustion. Every step showed your heart's intent. But the secret I speak of concerns her life and your journey together." He paused, letting his words sink in. Every member of the tribe leaned slightly forward, waiting, understanding that a revelation of great importance was about to unfold. Finally, the chief spoke the words that changed everything. "This woman is not only brave, she is chosen. She carries the spirit of our people, a strength and wisdom beyond her years. Her survival is not just her own, it is tied to the future of our tribe. The one who helps her in truth and honor gains more than friendship. They gain the blessing of her people." The traveler's eyes widened slightly. He had carried her out of compassion, without thought of reward, yet the chief's words made him realize the depth of what had happened. His journey had been an act of pure courage and kindness, and now it held significance far beyond the immediate moment. The woman looked at him, a quiet smile forming on her lips, understanding the recognition the chief had just given. The chief continued, his voice firm but filled with warmth. "Few outsiders show such selflessness. Few would endure what you have endured. The bond you share is rare, built on trust, courage, and honor. The secret is that her life is sacred to us, and you have protected it when no one else could. Your actions have been witnessed, and they are remembered." The traveler felt a mixture of relief, pride, and humility. He had acted out of simple humanity, yet the consequences were profound. The chief's words were not only praise, they were a declaration that his actions had altered the course of events, that he had become part of something larger than himself. The weight of this understanding pressed gently on his shoulders, lighter than his physical burden but heavier in meaning. The woman reached out and took his hand, her grip firm yet gentle. Though words were few, the gesture spoke volumes. She had survived because of his courage, and now the recognition of the chief gave her trust even greater depth. The traveler squeezed her hand in return, silently acknowledging the bond they shared. It was a bond forged in struggle, danger, and mutual respect, now strengthened by the chief's revelation. The chief motioned for the tribe to gather more closely. He spoke to them in the Apache language, explaining the journey, the dangers faced, and the traveler's unwavering determination. The people listened intently, their eyes reflecting admiration and curiosity. The story of the 10-hour journey spread through the camp, transforming the stranger into a figure of respect and honor. Even the children, who had earlier been playful and carefree, watched with wide eyes, understanding in a simple, instinctive way the meaning of courage and loyalty. Then the chief turned to the traveler again. Your actions have shown that courage is measured not by strength alone but by heart. You have protected life, shown respect, and acted with honor. This is the highest measure of a man. The traveler felt a deep sense of fulfillment, though he remained humble. He had done what he felt was right, without thought of reward or recognition, and now that choice had been acknowledged in a profound way. The words of the chief were more than praise. They were a declaration that his actions had meaning, that his courage and compassion mattered in a world that often overlooked such qualities. The woman spoke softly beside him, translating the chief's words as best as she could. Her voice was filled with gratitude, pride, and relief. "He saved me," she said, "not for himself, not for honor, but because it was right. The chief sees this now. Everyone sees this." The traveler nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. His actions, though simple in intention, had become a story of courage, trust, and honor. The revelation of the chief added a layer of meaning he had never anticipated. It was not merely about survival. It was about integrity, humanity, and the bonds that form when people act with true care for one another. The chief spoke one final time, his words deliberate and filled with solemnity. "The bond between you two is now recognized. The trust you have built is a blessing. You may rest, recover, and learn from our people. But remember this, every action matters. Every choice has meaning. The wilderness is unforgiving, but so is life itself. Honor, courage, and compassion are the true measures of strength." The traveler felt a quiet joy settle in his chest. The journey had been long, exhausting, and filled with uncertainty, yet it had led to this moment, a moment of understanding, recognition, and connection. He looked at the woman, whose dark eyes now held a mix of relief, gratitude, and quiet pride. Together, they had faced danger, uncertainty, and exhaustion. Together, they had forged a bond that now held the blessing of her people. As the morning wore on, the tribe began their daily activities again, but the traveler remained in the center of the clearing, reflecting on the journey. He had carried the woman through darkness and danger, guided by compassion and trust. He had earned the respect of her people through deeds rather than words. And now, the chief's revelation of the secret, the sacred significance of her life, and the blessing given to him, transformed the story into something larger than either of them alone. The woman moved beside him, speaking softly. "You saved me," she said, "and now you are part of our story. You carry not only my trust but the respect of my people." The traveler smiled faintly, exhausted but fulfilled. He had acted out of simple humanity, yet the consequences were profound. The chief's words, the tribe's recognition, and the woman's trust had created a moment of understanding and honor that would remain with him forever. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the camp in warm light, the traveler realized that this journey had changed him. The physical challenges had tested his body, but the emotional and moral challenges had tested his heart. He had learned that courage was not only about survival, but about empathy, integrity, and trust. He had learned that a single act of selflessness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. The chief finally gestured for him to rest, signaling that the formal acknowledgement was complete. The traveler sat back, letting the weight of exhaustion settle into relief. The woman rested her hand briefly on his arm, a gesture of silent thanks. Around them, the tribe moved through their routines, but their eyes occasionally flicked toward the traveler, a subtle acknowledgement of the honor he had earned. In that quiet morning, surrounded by the Apache people and the land that had tested them both, the traveler understood the depth of the journey. He had carried a life through danger and darkness, faced judgment and scrutiny, and emerged with respect, trust, and an unexpected blessing. The secret revealed by the chief was more than a story. It was a lesson in courage, compassion, and the power of human connection. And so, in the warmth of the rising sun, The traveler and the Apache woman shared a quiet, unspoken understanding. The journey had ended, but its lessons would remain forever. Their bond, forged in trust, endurance, and compassion, had been recognized and honored, and the secret revealed by the chief had transformed the story into one of lasting significance. The traveler finally allowed himself to rest fully, leaning back and watching the woman regain strength. The land around them, once a place of danger and uncertainty, now felt alive with possibility. He had faced the wilderness and the judgment of others, and through it all, he had acted with honor. The chief's secret, unexpected and profound, reminded him that sometimes the greatest rewards come not from seeking them, but from living with courage, compassion, and integrity.